For those of us old-timers that grew up with PC games in the 90s, Bullfrog's Dungeon Keeper is one of the most beloved series of old, along with revered classics like Baldur's Gate or Master of Magic. Dungeon Keeper put you in control of an underground dungeon and trusted you with the upkeep of creatures to train and rooms to build and traps to lay in order to thwart those sickening good heroes come to spoil your evil fun. Dungeon Keeper did a lot of new and exciting things at the time, like the indirect creature control scheme, which had you grab minions and literally throw them at the enemy, or the endlessly satisfying dungeon expansion mechanics, with the crumbling walls and the meaty stump of rooms being built, or the twisted underground aesthetic, oozing character from its every pixel, and perhaps the most iconic of all, the kind, gentle slap you could give your imps for them to work harder. Dungeon Keeper and its sequel remain a joy to play to this day, and a high watermark to reach for any developer hoping to replicate its delights. Calypso's Dungeons 2 attempts just that while adding its own spin on top of the dungeon building. Don't confuse this game with Dungeons 1, though. That game was nothing like Dungeon Keeper and honestly not very good. Dungeons 2, on the other hand? Well, I'm very happy to say that while not perfect by far, it succeeds at being a worthy entry on the very limited Dungeon Keeper-like genre. I was terribly pleased. Dungeons 2 is a dungeon management game with some light real-time strategy thrown on top of it. You are a shadow of the primeval, clawing its way back to relevance by building expansive underground layers to launch assaults against whatever objective the current map might give you. You build a roster of creatures to do this with, each with its own name and basic needs, and experience levels and upgrade tiers, and each type will have a job to do, be it mine for mana, craft secondary resources, research new upgrades, or patrol your dungeon. To expand your domain and build your power, you command your little workers to dig out space and mine gold, the primary resource of the game. Each map will be littered with special encounters and spider nests and other nasty surprises, so digging around is often a risk and reward proposition. Along with gold and crafting resources for traps and upgrades, you'll also need to harvest mana from crystal shrines, which will fuel your research spells and let you upgrade the population cap. Sooner rather than later, the forces of good will start pouring in waves into your dungeon, which you'll have to defend against with trap layouts and guard positioning, or by manually throwing your forces at them every time they show up. Eventually you'll want to gather an expedition force and venture into the surface to destroy those filthy humans, elves, and woodland creatures, corrupting the land that you're passing and typically culminating in the destruction of some outpost or another. And all the way through doing this, the narrator, Kevin Brighting of Stanley Parable fame, will be keeping you entertained with mostly funny commentary.
The first treasury was completed. Soon greedy evil's little snots would fill it with gold. You know the golden rule, right? Whoever has the gold makes the rules.
I enjoy this commentary for the most part. There are some genuinely witty jokes in there, but I can 100% see how some players might hate it. The narration consistently pokes fun at everything, makes jokes at your expense, and breaks the fourth wall all the time with Warcraft, Game of Thrones, and other cliché references, and being in a game's self-awareness, making the tone of the narrative the biggest departure from Dungeon Keeper, which played the part of the delightfully evil master completely straight and in-universe. I've no doubt that a less talented voice actor would have made this game absolutely insufferable. One way or another, you can simply go into the options and silence the man if he gets on your nerves. He doesn't need to be a deal breaker. Be warned though, the narrative of this game simply does not take itself seriously.
The evil has awoken, but its brothers are still asleep.
Huh? What on earth was that? That's not in my script. What a weirdo. No matter. We'd better get back to concentrating on the dungeon.
The main campaign mostly features the Horde, an orc and goblin themed faction, but in a few campaign missions, multiplayer and skirmish mode, you can also play as the demons, as well as the undead if you purchase their DLC, which comes with an entire new, much more difficult campaign. While there are many superficial differences between the factions, they all function very similarly to one another. You can think of it as a couple steps behind the StarCraft trifecta in terms of different mechanics for different races. Most maps will have the same progression going for them. A typical game will have you summon workers, dig out some fast gold and a few rooms, create a treasury, some housing, a mana harvest station, and a workshop for traps crafting and room upgrades. Every harvest, research, and crafting station needs an actual creature to use it and produce things for you, so you summon the specific minions to do it. Might as well get some pure combat creatures too, so they can defend the dungeon against the inevitable attackers. You set up traps to handle the increasing waves, you get the upgrades you deem necessary, and all the while you continue digging ever deeper for more gold, space, and possibly goodies like permanent buffs for your minions. You'll also want to send expeditions to the surface when you can and see what you can do up there. As your dungeon levels up, you get access to rooms and tools that can upgrade your creatures to a higher tier, which makes them far more effective in combat. Eventually you'll gather a force strong enough to steamroll through the overworld and destroy whatever it is that stands in your way. More often than not, at least on single player when you have no real time constraints, you'll delay on making the final push to the surface, just having a great time building the most awesome dungeon you can with the most amazing host of minions you can muster. Or, well, at least that's what I kept doing. You can idle away hours on end just building up your dungeon. There are a ton of good things going on in Dungeons 2, most of them taken directly from Dungeon Keeper. And none of them beats the satisfaction of digging out the underground to make your dungeon better in some way. Watching those blocks crumble under the diligent efforts of your workers is truly entertaining. There's just something about it, and it doesn't get old to greedily go ever deeper into the caverns to see what you might discover. Well, actually the spider nests do get a little bit old towards the end. There are only so many 8-legged monstrosities I can enjoy cleaning up. Other great features are the creature upgrade system, which I'll get to in a moment, the variety of utility and damage spells you can cast directly, the tower defense-like trap setups you can build, the upscaled philosophy of requiring enormous rooms to house all of your needs and gadgets. You always end up with a dungeon that's just awesome to look at, giving you that SimCity buzz of creating something complex from scratch. Especially so if you were mindful of room positioning for maximum efficiency. Room furnishing is a cool addition too. You don't simply plop down in the room, you also have to equip it with the appropriate items to get the job done, often paying attention to the balance between production and storage. I'm also quite fond of the cartoonish aesthetic, with every creature being immediately distinctive and full of personality. Every faction has 4 basic types of creatures in addition to the workers, and each time has 3 tiers of upgrade. Some are straight promotions, like biters into gremlins into Nosferatu, but most of these upgrades will actually be a decision between one type of monster or another, like choosing between a goblin assassin with invisibility, trap disabling, and sneak attacks, or a goblin mech with ranged attack immunity and a huge flamethrower. It's also your choice to have a large contingent of puny creatures, or a small group of powerful ones, or something in between. The main addition that Dungeons 2 brings to the formula is the overworld adventuring, and I'd certainly list it as a positive despite its sometimes clunky controls. The transitions between the 2 maps is completely seamless, you simply click one minimap or the other. The game switches from indirect management to classic RTS up there, with direct control of your troops and manual activation of the large variety of creature abilities at your disposal. Now, while wholly entertaining, the main campaign is terribly easy on most parts and doesn't truly require you to use these abilities. You can simply steamroll your way forward. But you'll get trounced time and again in the Undead DLC if you don't take good care of using abilities when needed. Most of a map's objectives will be found on the surface, be it controlling certain places for victory point buildup, destroying enemy encampments, or finding a specific MacGuffin, a powerful artifact that will give you the victory. This entire aspect of the game makes Dungeons 2 into its own thing instead of just an attempt at replicating Dungeon Keeper's glory. It's a worthy evolution. Respect, brother! Oh jeez, why did I put that in the script? The other big addition is the 3 different factions. All 3 play very similarly, they all need gold, mana, and crafting materials, and each will be obtained in the exact same way with equivalent creatures. There's a lot of equivalence, in fact. To stay happy, demons get adored by servants instead of consuming beer like the Horde does, while undead need to take relaxing baths in the lairs from time to time. The Horde trains in the pit to become different tiers, while demons require a sacrifice of a worker to improve in the pentagram, and undead just get tossed into a vat to get to the next creature level. The differences, while minor, are still numerous enough to give each faction its own feel, especially in the looks department. Also, the creatures of each faction will have vastly different abilities to use during combat, demon workers can be upgraded to teleport anywhere, and the main difference will be with the undead, which can't heal in combat and will die and resurrect at your graveyard repeatedly, very much in the theme with their whole philosophy. It was really cool to explore each one of these factions, because the creature design is a big draw. I was always excited to see what the next one would be like. I'd also list as a positive the narrator and the writing in general, but that's entirely personal preference. The jokes sometimes fail to land catastrophically and some of them are way overplayed, but for every lame line there's a genuine chuckle somewhere else, sometimes a hearty laugh even. But if you hate it when games break the fourth wall, this one right here will certainly annoy the crap out of you.
Insert funny line here. Wait, what? The script doesn't seem to be done here. Amateurs. Oh, to work with professionals for once.
Dungeons 2 is also a great value proposition in my opinion. The full vanilla campaign is about 20 hours if you explore every map every time, plus another 12 or so for the Undead DLC, which is the only one that I got. On top of that, you have about 10 single-player skirmish maps to play with any faction that you like, and then there's a fully realized multiplayer mode which can give you as much game time as you want if you have friends to play with. I'm not much of a multiplayer guy, so I didn't try it, but hey, it's there, it's functional. I certainly felt like I got more than my money's worth with this one. The negatives are decidedly minor in comparison, let me tell you about them. The biggest problem I had with Dungeons 2 is the difficulty tuning. There are no difficulty settings at all, and the main campaign is extremely easy, to the point where I would have had to try to lose in order to be defeated. The overworld enemies just get destroyed by a tier 2 squad, and utterly annihilated by fully level up monsters. I feel this was probably a general complaint, because by contrast, the Undead DLC is extremely hard, too much so. I appreciated the extra challenge, but it's also overly grindy, with wave after relentless wave of powerful heroes hammering at your doors all the time. My wife is a big Dungeon Keeper fan, and she loved this game, all the way to the point where she had to give up in the middle of the DLC. The missions just became too frustrating for her. She's real bad at video games though, so I don't put much stock in her weak, womanly problems. This whole problem would have been easily solved by a difficulty slider in the options. It's a routine feature in nearly every strategy game, and I found myself dearly missing it in both campaigns. I can't come up with a good reason why this wasn't included or patched in. I can't imagine it would take a lot of extra development time to allow the player to tweak the frequency of attacks or enemy damage, for example. The controls in the overworld are serviceable, but they don't make it any easier, with no way to hotkey group assignments and just general clunkiness that gets in the way of positioning of your troops and using their abilities effectively. In the underground section, they'll use their abilities automatically, and you can simply drop them whenever you think they're most effective. But I was consistently missing a way to mobilize only predetermined guard squads instead of either picking every minion individually or telling the whole dungeon to go fight somewhere. It would have been nice to have a militia submenu or something like that to assign certain squads to certain battle standards. Clicking on things with your oversized hand cursor is also kind of weird. It took me a few hours to get used to where the hand was actually pointing. You do get used to it though, so it becomes a non-issue a few hours in. What doesn't go away is the urge to rotate the camera. All the game allows is a brief, useless tilt. It's not a functional issue unless you're trying to click on the southernmost edge of the map, but the ability to rotate the camera seems like a baffling oversight in a game of this type, what with the constant need to click in tight corridors. This is purely speculation, but I'm willing to bet the reason for this is shortcuts taken with the pretty models in the overworld. Rotating the camera would have exposed them at very unflattering angles. Where your dungeon progression is concerned, it was satisfying for the great majority of the time, but the system does suffer from both a lack of room variety and upgrade overload. Any given dungeon will have only 5 different functional rooms. Happiness upkeep, either a brewery, an adoration chamber, or a bathhouse, the undead need to relax, you see. Mana harvest, exactly the same for all 3 factions. Trap and room research, wholly equivalent across the board. Minion improvement, each with its own twist depending on the faction. And minion restoration, a hospital for the horde, a graveyard for the undead, and split between the Adoration Chamber and the Pentagrams for the demons. In addition, you have the Treasury to store your gold, and the Guard Room to post minions on guard duty at a certain spot. This all certainly does the job, but I was missing some kind of room for enemy corpse and prisoner shenanigans, or some kind of creative off-the-wall room special to each faction. Just, one more thing. That being said, I'm sure this lack of variety stems from the fact that there are whole 3 factions to develop, and something had to give. While it would have been nice to have more, it's perfectly understandable that they drew the line where they did. In regards to the upgrade overload, many of the upgrades to your runes feel more like busywork and padding to the research tree than anything else. Especially egregious are the 5 ranks of better storage capacity to some of the rooms. These upgrades are just not fun to worry about, they just clutter the menus for no good reason. Lastly, there were instances where the narrator consistently got on my nerves, and that's whenever he literally yells at you for not getting on with the map objective.
Hello? Anyone home? Workers are building one outpost after the next, and the dozing evil sits around on its icy butt. Would someone please be kind enough to, in future, intercept these workers before they can build an outpost?
A line making fun of you for being slow is perfectly fine, but this degree of borderline abuse was pretty off-putting, especially when it was for something I could do nothing about in my current circumstances. I'm busy enough struggling to survive, you son of a bitch. There's no way I can find my way to the middle of the map to do what you were telling me to do right this freaking moment. It's not that bad for most of the time, though. Often he'll just make a snide or offhand comment about how the lazy primeval couldn't be bothered to give a damn about the overworld. And that's about it. That's all the gripes I have with the game. It was a thoroughly enjoyable experience. Dungeon Keeper was a stroke of genius, and so was its sequel. This isn't rose-tinted glasses. Go to GOG and get yourself a copy for $5 each. After you get used to the old graphics, you'll see just how freaking great they were and how well they hold up to this day. Just getting the footage for this video made me want to replay through the whole thing again. So any game that gets close to the Dungeon Keeper formula and executes it competently enough is going to have my interest. Dungeons 2 isn't just competent, it's actually a great dungeon management game. If you're even remotely interested in the genre, or even RTS and management simulation in general, I would 100% recommend it. Hour after joyful hour will crumble like so many dungeon blocks before your little workers. And if you see them slacking, make sure to give them a hearty slap for good measure. They always deserve it.